I hope you enjoyed this talk. These talks are always offered freely so that no one is ever denied access to them. And your support, or dana, also makes a big difference. Dana is the ancient Pali word for spontaneous generosity of heart. If you feel inspired to support these talks by offering dana, you can do so by visiting my website at www.mindfulvalley.com. Thank you so much. So I wanted to start tonight's talk by reading this wonderful poem that I love by an 11th grader at an all-girls high school in Brooklyn, Shani Gorkin. Some of you have heard this one before, but I love it, so I'm going to read it again. And her poem is Worst Day Ever. Today was the absolute worst day ever. And don't try to convince me that there's something good in every day, because when you take a closer look, the world is a pretty evil place. Even if some goodness does shine through once in a while, satisfaction and happiness don't last. And it's not true that it's all in the mind and heart, because true happiness can be attained only if one's surroundings are good. It's not true that good exists. I'm sure that you can agree that the reality creates my attitude. It's all beyond my control. And you will never in a million years hear me say that today was a very good day. I'm going to read that backwards now. Ready? Today was a very good day. And you'll never in a million years hear me say it's all beyond my control. My attitude creates the reality. I'm sure that you can agree that it's not true that good exists only if one's surroundings are good. True happiness can be attained because it's all in the mind and heart, and it's not true that satisfaction and happiness don't last. Some goodness does shine through once in a while, even if this world is a pretty evil place. Because when you take a closer look, there's something good in every day. And don't try to convince me that today was the absolute worst day ever. Isn't that so good? I love it. And, this poem always reminds me of this quote that I love, which is attributed to the Buddha, which is, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts we make the world." And this quote is supposedly from the opening lines of the Dhammapada, which is the collection of sayings of the Buddha in verse form, and it's one of the most widely read of the Buddhist scriptures. And if you don't have it, it's a really great book to have. They're one by Gil Fronsdal, actually. I really enjoy it. They're small. It's a small book. But in actuality, this is one of the many fake Buddha quotes out there. And if you're interested, there's a whole website that I check often with that name, Fake Buddha Quotes. And it's dedicated to teasing them all apart. Like, really, did the Buddha really say that? The Pali text actually translates the first two lines of the Dhammapada as, "Mental states are preceded by mind, have mind as their master, are created by mind." That's the actual quote. I'll read it again. "Mental states are preceded by mind, have mind as their master, are created by mind." And the Buddha also did apparently say, whatever a monk keeps pursuing with his thinking and pondering, that becomes the inclination of his awareness. Okay? We can say her. Whatever a nun keeps pursuing with her thinking and pondering, that becomes the inclination of her awareness. So however it's written, in the practice, this is where writer's skillful effort really becomes important. So we need to continue to very diligently pay attention to what we're thinking and direct our effort, our mindfulness, to combat those thoughts that lead to suffering and nurture those thoughts that lead us to more happiness. As I've said before in here, it's almost that simple. And in the sutras, when the Buddha was teaching us about how we practice, he constantly used 3 words in the sutras: diligent, ardent, and resolute. Over and over and over. Diligent, ardent, resolute. And in our practice of meditation, right effort then involves learning a kind of sustained concentration, which is going to help us to slow our mind and body in our daily lives as well, and open us up to more clarity or insight. Okay? So we need this kind of strong concentration in order for us to actually become aware of our bodies and to check out the contents of our minds and notice the effects that that's having on our mind, body, heart. The way I usually like to explain this, I often use the metaphor of a lake. Many of you have heard this before. But we need our sustained effort and concentration to help to have the contents of the lake, if you will, if it's all churned up the lake, to kind of settle to the bottom of the lake, maybe like a snow globe, so that there's more clarity in the mind, in the lake. It's a clear lake, a clear snow globe, so that we can see what is floating through the mind. If the mind's all churned up and there's no sustained concentration, it's just going to be a jumble and we're going to be caught up in it. Okay? So effort, which is the topic of tonight's talk, and concentration are needed in order to calm that churning in the waves of our lake, if you will, in the mind, so that we can see more clearly into the nature of our minds. That's what the practice is all about. What is the nature of my mind? How does it work? And we can more clearly exactly see what we're believing and understand more clearly how our thoughts affect the quality of our happiness and our unhappiness, and consider what beliefs are actually causing me or others unhappiness in my life, and what thoughts and beliefs are bringing me more joy. Really check it out. And then when we see these things, when we can clearly see what brings happiness and what brings suffering, then we have to make a very strong effort to turn away from those thoughts that are causing us suffering and to nurture those ones that are going to bring us more happiness, to make that conscious intention. And all of this, of course, involves then a lot of perseverance and dedication and patience, and a lot of what I like to call kind effort. When we talk about right effort, I like to almost think of it as kind effort, because if our efforting involves a kind of drill sergeant attention, or attitude towards ourselves, it's not going to bring us a lot of benefit or joy if we're being a drill sergeant with ourselves. One of my teachers, Tara Brock, says we can't punish ourselves into being a good person. It's another one of those sticky notes. We cannot punish ourselves into being a good person. In fact, the Buddha taught that energy, virya, it's called virya, the mental factor behind right effort, can appear in what are considered either wholesome or unwholesome terms. And so what this means is that our energy that we put in with our effort can either fuel desire and aggression and violence and ambition, or it can fuel things like generosity and self-discipline and kindness and concentration and understanding. We get to choose, right? And so we can decide, where do I want to put my energy? Do I want to put my energy into anger, desire, ambition? And when you're thinking about stuff and pondering and chewing it and getting angry, guess what? That's where your energy is. Do I really want to? How is that affecting me? And how does it affect me when I put my energy, my effort into gratitude, generosity, kindness? How does that affect me? And check it out, So it's also our choice to more consciously and with intention make these decisions, So to have the intention to want to understand and more clearly see where we're applying our energy, to ask ourselves that question, and then to really observe, really with curiosity, great curiosity, our own actions and thoughts and our words, and what effect those have on ourselves and other people. So with right effort, we're agreeing to diligently, ardently, resolutely train our minds through this practice. And before I continue, because we haven't had a review of these actually for a couple of weeks, the 8 spokes in the wheel of the Dhamma Chakra, the wheel of the Eightfold Path, are divided into 3 sections. Okay, so just as a reminder, there's wisdom, which is Panna. There's ethics or moral conduct, which is Sila. And then we're into the Samadhi or mental discipline section of our path. And so wisdom includes right or skillful understanding or view and right intention. Ethics, Sila, involves right speech, action, and livelihood. And now this section, Samadhi, mental discipline, includes right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So I'll be talking about the other 2 in this month. But it's really helpful for me to remember that the mental discipline part starts with right effort. Okay, that's where it begins. And so within this gigantic big category of right effort is a training that's often referred to as the 4 great efforts or endeavors. Another list, right? There's another 4. And these 4 great efforts, as a reminder, are to prevent the arising of unarisen, unwholesome states, to abandon unwholesome states that have already arisen, they're already there, to bring about wholesome states that have not yet arisen, and to maintain and perfect wholesome states that have arisen. Okay? And as many of you may recall, the unwholesome states are often called the hindrances or the fetters. Okay? And there are 5 of them. And these are desire, or grasping, ill will, aversion, restlessness, or worry, anxiety, sloth and torpor, or, even unconsciousness. And then the 5th one is doubt, or skepticism. And so I'm going to very briefly review these. So the first one, desire, can be interpreted in 2 ways. And the first way is to understand it as greed for what are called the 5 strands of sense pleasures, another 5. And these are pleasant sights, sounds, smells, taste, and touches. So all of our senses, grasping and greed for those. And a broader description of desire is the craving or greed for things that tend to support an ego or a sense of self, an identity. And these are things like wealth and power and status and fame. Or, it could be maybe a person or an object that we crave or are greedy about. This might, for instance, even look like a craving for respect. That can be a fetter, that can be a hindrance, right? Or it's really anything that the ego craves that can cause us to do or say things that might be harmful to ourselves or others, if you look at it that way. So that's a very brief summary of desire, all those things. The second hindrance or fetter is ill will, and this is a synonym for aversion. And this includes things like, of course, hatred and anger and resentment, repulsion of every shade, big or small, things that we don't like. So this aversion, of course, then can mean, other people, ourselves. That's a big one too. We have aversion towards ourselves. Objects, situations that we're in or that we see happening. So that's aversion. And the third hindrance is dullness or drowsiness, again, also called sloth and torpor. And this has the feature of mental unwieldiness, right? So dullness in the mind is Tina, Thina, and it manifests as mental inertia, right? So you've experienced that in meditation or even in daily life, mental inertia. And then there's drowsiness, which is midda, M-I-D-D-H-A, which is seen as a kind of mental sinking, a heaviness of the mind, or an excessive inclination to sleep. Okay. So the fourth one is the exact opposite of that. The fourth hindrance is restlessness and worry. And with this, the mind is just dequieted. The mind is not at all quiet or heavy. It's agitated, it's excited, and it can drive the mind with speed. It's very speedy and kind of a frenzy. We've all experienced that. That's restlessness and worry. And worry, interestingly, is also remorse over past mistakes, along with anxiety about the future, which I find interesting, which can include a worry that past mistakes will lead to future harm. That's an interesting one. These are brief summaries. So the fifth hindrance is doubt. It's always the fifth one, last one. And this is described as a kind of chronic indecisiveness or lack of resolution. Chronic indecisiveness, lack of resolution. And this is not the doubt that involves a kind of review of our own intelligence, which is an attitude that the Buddha actually encouraged. Question everything. That he's not talking about that kind of doubt. Not asking you to be a strong believer in something that you don't understand. Skepticism, healthy skepticism. This is more a persistent inability to commit ourselves to the path of meditation. Doubt. Can't commit myself to this path. And so it's more about when we find ourselves unsure about either our own ability to awaken, to find enlightenment, or to change, or to follow this path. There's doubt about that. Or we're unsure about the practice itself. It's too hard, it's not working, that kind of thing. That's what he's talking about with doubt. You're more doubting yourself, okay? And it's really important, I think, to note here that the Buddha taught that all of these hindrances arise within the mind, not from outside of it. It's all of it's in the mind. If you go back to the beginning, right? So you might notice this and investigate these hindrances for yourself. They all involve how you yourself are relating to what's happening, not what's happening. I teach this all the time. I used to in my MBSR workshops. Those of you who took it might remember this. That's kind of the key teaching right there. It's all about, not about the stuff that's happening. How are you relating to what's happening to yourself, another person, the situation? It makes all the difference. So in essence, they all involve what you're believing and how you're responding, and that comes from the mind, again, not from outside circumstances. So this is actually really great news, because it means that in order to discover more joy and happiness in our lives, we have the power to train our minds. That's where our power lies. Life is suffering. It has suffering in it. There's suffering. That's a truth. But we make it so much harder on ourselves by how we're relating and responding to it. And the other great news is that the Buddha shows us how to do this. He shows us that it's actually possible to find more joy and happiness in our lives. So it's helpful for me to remember that not only the Buddha, but Buddhist teachers for several thousands of years have shown us that this is possible to train our minds. And as we all know, science, it's so cool, is now showing us the same thing. I love that. What the Buddha taught for thousands of years is now being shown to be true. So whenever I'm feeling doubt, I really try to remember that. And also remember my own teachers. I've said this many times, but it's true. And recall how they, teachers who are maybe 10, 20 years older than me, how they relate to me and others and themselves. This always helps me with doubt. I can't do it. And I remember Pat or Tara or Hugh, And so I see through them that it's really possible to train the mind and the heart. So with the first two of the four great efforts, we are being asked to use our mindfulness practice to work with these hindrances, the unwholesome states, to prevent the arising of them, okay, prevent them, and then if they're there, if they're already here, to abandon them, right? So like preventing anger from arising. But then if anger's already there, we abandon it. We see it and we train ourselves to abandon it. So it helps me to remember that the Buddha was often referred to as a kind of physician or a doctor. And just like a skilled physician has different medicines for all these different ailments that we might have, the Buddha had different antidotes for us to use for these different hindrances, just like medicine. And some are equally applicable to all the hindrances, and some are just for specific hindrances. So I'll go over some of these. So in a really important discourse in the sutras, the Buddha explains 5 techniques that I'm going to offer you for getting rid of distracting or unwholesome thoughts. Okay? So the first one is to expel the thought and replace it with a wholesome thought. It's exact opposite. And so in the suttas, this is described as the way a carpenter might use a peg to drive out the old one. And this one resonates with me because my husband collects old tools and he crafts his stuff the old-fashioned way, so I know what I've seen those pegs. You know. For desire, one remedy is to focus on impermanence, which helps us to let go of clinging, or the assumption that people, situations, ourselves, objects that we desire are permanent and are somehow going to give us permanent happiness, right? If I only had that thing, that's going to give me permanent happiness. That new house, new car, that's going to do it. So we think about impermanence, that everything's going to fade. The remedy for ill will or aversion is to practice and meditate on loving kindness, of course, which helps us to remove the hindrance of hatred and anger by helping us to remember and recall that all beings, everyone wants to be happy and well. You can remember that for, people that are really irritating you, or even those people that you don't think deserve happiness, that they too actually just want to be happy and well, and to remember that. The remedy for dullness and drowsiness is to put some effort into arousing energy, and there are several methods for this. I think I gave a whole talk on this, so this is really, really a brief summary. But one way you can do this is to visualize a bright ball of light when you're sitting. Anybody do that? I don't see any. No? Okay, try it. Try it next time you're sleepy. Visualize a big, bright, brilliant ball of light. You can also do standing meditation. You can also do brisk walking when you're sitting and you're just trying to fall asleep. Go take a walk and come back. Go do a little walk and come back and sit. Another one that I find interesting is reflecting on death, which is the fact that life is short. Wake up. Wake up. Life is short. And I didn't come up with these. These are right from the Buddha. You can simply make a firm determination to continue to arouse energy, right? Just to make that effort, just like when you're driving a car at night, right? You just keep feeding yourself that intention to wake up. And finally, the last decision is just to take a nap. Go sit, go rest. And the Dalai Lama often says, sometimes sleep is the best meditation. And it's really true. So the remedy for restlessness and worry is to turn the mind to a simple object that tends to calm it down. So when we're restless and worried in our daily lives then too, and I've been doing this recently, I don't know, I feel very, I have high energy lately for some reason. I don't know if it's the fall, what it is. So I've been doing a lot of what's called concentration practice, which is when the mind is scattered and the energy is high, you focus on one thing, and usually that's the breath. Just go back to the breath. Let everything go back to the breath. Concentration practice. You could also use sound. Just close the eyes, listen to sound. Or even sight. You could stop and just watch a bird, or watch something in nature, just to stop the mind from kind of being scattered. So the remedy for doubt, which is the fifth hindrance, is we ask ourselves questions and continue to study the teachings of what we don't understand until that starts to become more clear, right? I don't understand this. I don't get it. And then, so the idea is just to keep studying it, keep investigating it in your meditation practice. Keep checking it out for yourself to see if it's true. And once we get it on a more experiential level and not an intellectual level, we have much less doubt, because it's like, aha, okay, I get that, I see that that's true for me. Okay? So that's, not, and it's, by the way, not because the Buddha said so, or I said so, or some teacher said so. As always with this practice, don't believe anything I say. You check it out for yourself until you see the truth of it and you understand it, okay? So you don't just toss it because you doubt it. I don't believe that. Check it out. So with right effort, the point is to constantly honor our intention, to pay really close attention to the mind, and notice when the hindrances have arisen, and especially in practice, when we're in absolute sitting meditation, but in our lives also, anger or resentment or blame or whatever it is has arisen. We notice it, we see it, and then we consciously work to abandon it. We root these things out. We root them out just like we're weeding our garden. Okay, I'm going to get rid of that because I know that causes me so much suffering. Okay, so what we're doing in a way is learning to identify the weeds in our garden of the mind, just like we identify weeds in our garden. Wait, that's a flower. I don't want to root that out. But okay, these are weeds, and I know what a dandelion looks like, so that one's easy. But just like your own weeds in your garden, some of them are really easy to just pluck out, aren't they? Okay, I can abandon that. But some of these weeds are deep. They're deeply rooted. You take a lot of tools to get that out, a lot of work and effort. They're down there, and then they tend to grow back often because their roots are so deep and there's so many of them. So some of these things have been, patience is involved, because some of these things have been growing there for decades, So it might be helpful to remember, as a summary, that there are 5 main types of weeds in our mind. 5 main types of weeds. So clinging, greed, okay, that's one weed to notice. Aversion and hateful thoughts, not wanting, don't want, don't like, okay. The mind states that cause us to feel restless or worried. What are those mind states? What are you believing or thinking about that makes you feel restless and worried? Check it out. What are mind states? Remember, it all comes from the mind. What are the mind states, the beliefs, the thoughts that make us feel like going to sleep? They cause us to just feel really drowsy. I'm done, I wanna, right? And then what are the mind states that keep us from practicing? Keep us from coming back and sitting on our cushion? What are those mind states? And those are doubts. That's the doubt weed, if you will. So, as you might imagine, there are many, many methods for rooting these weedy thoughts out. But given our time, limited time, I'll just review, okay? So when you find yourself caught up in unwholesome, toxic thinking, you can consciously replace the unwholesome thoughts with more wholesome thoughts, right? So if you're finding blame or hating someone or angry, how could you counter that? What would be the counter to that would be a little more loving or kind or compassionate? Okay, you replace it. When you're grasping at something that you really, really want, remember impermanence. Are you going to want that 5 years from now? That kind of thing. When you're feeling aversion for yourself or others, again, meditate on loving kindness. When you're feeling sloth and torpor, put more conscious effort into arousing energy. When you're feeling restless, consciously use the calming practice, like go right to the breath, calm, concentration. When you're feeling doubtful, again, take a deeper look into it what you're believing and really investigate it. Recall your own teachers. Recall the people, all those that have come before for doubt. So after we've worked to remove these hindrances, our garden is going to look a lot more manageable, right? It's going to look a little more clean. We move on to the next two of the four great efforts, which is to cultivate then the wholesome states of mind that you've created. So arouse wholesome states that have not yet arisen, and then maintain and perfect wholesome states that have arisen. Okay. So what this means basically is that we want to continue then to water the flowers that we planted, the wholesome states, and really take care of them so that our garden doesn't become overgrown by weeds. We want to have a beautiful garden. We want to cultivate in the mind those flowers. And these wholesome states or flowers that we want to grow are grouped in many ways in the teachings. And the Buddha puts special emphasis on another list. There's 7 of these. Whew. And these are called the 7 factors of enlightenment. 7 factors of enlightenment. You guys want these? This is it. These are the 7 factors. So they're mindfulness, which we'll talk about next week, investigation, energy, rapture, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity, balance. And these are called the enlightenment factors because they're said to not only lead to enlightenment, but they become enlightenment itself. When you're enlightened, you are experiencing all these 7 enlightenment factors, which is cool. So again, because of time, I'm just going to really briefly summarize these. So the first factor is mindfulness, and it might be good to know that you're already on your way. You guys have this one, right? You have the mindfulness factor. Mindfulness helps to clear the way for insight into the true nature of things, to bring to light what's already here right now in the present moment. And many have talked about that in the go-around. Being in the present moment, being mindful of the present moment that is stripped of all our stories and our narratives and our commentary and our interpretation and our projections and all our habitual conditioned ways that we perceive things. It's stripped of that. We're just present. When our mindfulness practice has been more established, we've developed an ability to see into the nature of our minds more, and so then the factor of investigation steps in, right? This is the investigation aspect. So when we can see the nature of our minds, the investigation factor helps us to notice more and more what we're believing. We investigate what we're believing, and we have more of a capacity for that. And so we can better assess as we continue to go along the path what brings us happiness and what brings us suffering, and see those thoughts and beliefs more clearly. So what's really important to remember here is that while mindfulness is basically receptive, we're open to seeing things as they are, investigation is an active factor. Do you see that? So mindfulness is receiving and investigating is really active. I like the way Ajahn Brahmavamaso describes this. It says, the mind has 2 main functions, doing and knowing. The way of meditation is to calm the doing, to complete tranquility while maintaining the knowing. Sloth and torpor occur when one carelessly calms both the doing and the knowing, unable to distinguish between them, right? So basically, when you're in that place, you're asleep. So what this means is that the work of investigation requires a lot of energy, which is the 3rd factor of enlightenment. We need that energy to investigate. We can't just kind of bliss out and go away when we're practicing. That's not really the practice. And as we continue to put energy into our practice, the 4th factor of enlightenment arises, which is rapture, right? And many of you may have already experienced this. And anybody experience that? That just sense of bliss or calm in practice? I see heads nodding. Yeah. So, this is when the mind has become clear of the hindrances of unwanted negative thinking. And we're just present with what's right here with a clarity of mind. And there can be a sense of bliss-like waves through the body. And the mind feels very crystal clear and totally joyful because we're just present. There's no hindrances kind of floating through the mind. And you might, as an exercise in practice, start to check that out. It's a really good question to ask yourself. Are the hindrances present right now? Are any of them here? And if they're not, enjoy that. Enjoy the present moment. There was a few years ago on a very intense 10-day retreat I was on where I very vividly, it was like day 9 or something, and I was just really in, and I vividly remember this just blissful state of it did feel like rapture, and I was so bummed because part of my brain knew that I had to get up and leave. I had a yogi job that involved throwing the trash out, and I was late, and so here, I was sitting there thinking, my God, this is so amazing. Damn it, So not enlightenment yet, and so I throw that out there as a caution, which is that, as my example, we can really, when we get to this state, we can cling to it. It's actually called the bliss state, and we can really want that, and we want it again and again, right? So I remember that coming back from my yogi job, in the next sit, I sat down with the expectation of, okay, bring it on, I'm going to get that bliss state again. And of course you can't do it that way. It has to arrive organically, and it arrives because all the other factors have come before it. So paradoxically, you really can't strive for that. It has to kind of happen organically. And it can also, again, create a kind of excitement, like, oh wow, I've reached the rapture state. And this tends to bring on a sense of restlessness, this excitement of, I got it. And so we want to increase the state, of course, bliss, and we want to hold on to it. And it's just going to bring us backwards into the hindrances. So it's good to remember if you reach that state, And if you grab onto it, it's fine. It's just, it'll happen. So as we continue to practice, the good news is that this restlessness can eventually reside after a while. We'll learn how to calm that restlessness, okay? And rapture, by the way, is going to subside too, and it's going to turn into more of a sense of tranquility. And tranquility has more of a tone of quiet and calm. It's tranquil. It's actually much more enjoyable than rapture, right? And so, happily, a sense of rapture still kind of remains, but it becomes much more subdued. It's like a self-possessed serenity then. And tranquility then transforms or ripens into the 6th factor of enlightenment, which is concentration, which is often called a one-pointed unification of mind. So finally, as concentration and this one-pointed unification deepens, we arrive at the last factor of enlightenment, which is the culmination of our practice. Y'all know this one, right? Thank you. Yeah, it's equanimity, right? So it's a fruit of our practice. And so this is the last of what are called the Brahmaviharas, the divine abodes. And equanimity, by the way, is also the last of the 10 paramis that we've reviewed, the qualities of mind and heart that the Buddha urged us to consciously, constantly cultivate that can help bring us more joy and peace into our lives. So equanimity, balance, is really what the whole practice is aiming towards. It's helpful to remember equanimity. And when we discover equanimity, what we realize is that happiness is at the very center of wanting and aversion. It's at the center of it. We're not clinging to anything that is impermanent. Okay? So what we're doing is simply observing when things that create happiness in the mind arise, and when things that create unhappiness arise. And in the sutras, the Buddha writes about the time before his awakening, and when he noticed two tendencies within his own mind. And I'm going to read these to you. This is from a sutra called The Two Modes of Thinking. First, he would notice that, quote, thinking imbued with sensuality or ill will or harmfulness has arisen in me, and that leads to my own affliction, or to the affliction of others, or to the affliction of both. It obstructs discernment, promotes vexation, and does not lead to nirvana. He also noticed that as he mindfully observed this kind of thinking with an awareness that it led to suffering, it would subside. So he would notice, second, that thinking imbued with renunciation, letting go, and non-ill will and non-harmfulness has arisen in me, and that leads neither to my own affliction, nor to the affliction of others, nor to the affliction of both. It fosters discernment, promotes lack of vexation, and leads to nirvana. So having observed the arising of this kind of thinking, he would very calmly, consciously continue to watch this. And he describes how he watched his thoughts this way, which I really like. Just as in the last month of the hot season, when all the crops have gathered into the village, a cowherd would look after his cows. While resting under the shade of a tree or out in the open, he simply keeps himself mindful of, quote, those cows. In the same way, I simply kept myself mindful of, quote, those mental qualities. So in our practice, and as our practice deepens, we can really do the same thing. We can allow ourselves to rest in our awareness and very calmly, consciously make an effort to be mindful of those cows. I live on a cow field, as you all know, so that resonates with me. And so we can notice when we've wandered away and just bring ourselves back again and again to this peaceful field of our mind. Like we're hurting our thoughts. So just in the last couple of minutes, I'm going to offer you to just sit for a couple of minutes. And so you might just take a nice deep breath in, deep breath out. And just even right now, check out where the mind is. Where is the mind? Is it present or is it somewhere else? Just notice. And are any of the hindrances in the mind in the moment? No judgment, just really aware. So is there any kind of wanting or not wanting? Is there restlessness, worry, sloth, torpor, doubt? And if you discover any of those hindrances, can you use some of the remedies? Try it out. Try them out. And so to end, I'm just going to offer you two quotes. One is a very simple teaching from the Buddha, which I think kind of summarizes the whole practice of the four great efforts, which is set your heart on doing good. Set your heart on doing good. Do it over and over again, and you will be filled with joy. And the second one is actually from a dream I had a while back, and when I woke up, I strongly heard these words. When your mind is filled with God, you'll know when you have wandered. When your mind is filled with God, you'll know when you have wandered.